something else that kind of was an after action was, those things are very sensitive, the calibration. And so we had one that was like kind of calibrated that was reading close to 20.8, but like the other ones were all flashing. And I was like, this is horrible. This is the one piece of equipment that's really going to show us what the environment was like. But I still think it was somewhat accurate, the one that we did try to calibrate. But again, just having your equipment prepped and ready to go, that was one of our big issues. And I actually have video of it going off where they turn it on where the kids are, and it's reading 16 to 17%. And if you ask anybody that works in hazmat, anything below 18 is not sustainable for life. Plus, these kids had been urinating and defecating in a small space for going on now 2 weeks. There wasn't a whole lot of, or if any, air circulation. I think there was just a little bit that the water would bring through. But all in all, it was pretty horrendous. They said it smelled so bad in there that they thought that it was decaying bodies when they initially found the boys, and they thought that they were all dead until they had come down that ledge. They said that's how bad it smelled. As that was happening, there was a rock climbing team out of Chiang Mai that worked with us. Like we said, technical rescue is another one of our specialties. And so we said, man, if we do kick this thing off, it's going to be a real pain to try to get these kids in litters over all this treacherous terrain. So what we did was we just started building these huge 150-foot high lines through the cave, and that helped us not only transport equipment, so as we were bringing tanks in and supplies in, but we were also able to tension them so tight that we could put like a full litter and a person in there, and basically just like a clothesline, move them 150 feet at a time, and it cut down on a huge amount of the risk, and it cut down on the transportation time to get them out. So that was huge. We had about 3 of those set up in the initial areas, and as you'll see in some later pictures of the boys coming out in action, you'll see how those lines really played a pivotal role. Here's one of them right here. This was a rehearsal we did to see, how much weight it could take and how it was all going to work. As you can, it's kind of tough to see because it was super dark in there. But there's ultimately 2 lines and there's 2 pulleys, and then there's kind of a pull line, and it just basically hangs, and the litter would drag over sharp rocks, and then when it was over those 50-foot drops, it would just slide right across. Again, as all that was happening in the cave outside, we were going through our rehearsals with the kids. Something that no one had ever done before was, basically take an unconscious person and bring them underwater for 30 minutes at a time in an environment like this. So it became real obvious that the only thing that was going to work was if we had a positive pressure full face mask where a kid could be completely asleep and breathe, and not have to control a regulator like a regular dive that could pop out of his mouth. I was just worried because the ones we had brought were for adults, but fortunately we were able to crank them down so tight that we were able to get seals, and we actually went to a pool, you'll see here in a minute, that allowed us to actually test and to swim with the kids and actually see if the masks were going to hold in a controlled environment. Because a lot of this, everybody has rule books for stuff. Nobody had a rule book for any of this. And I remember when I called Doc Rush in New York, I was like, hey, Doc, and I remember he didn't answer my call at first, and I called him again. I'm like, hey, it's Derek. I'm in Thailand at this cave site. And he was like, oh, yeah, man, I was wondering if you guys were there. And I was like, asking him, I was like, I got some bad news. I don't know, we found him alive, but right now we're debating how to get him out. And, I told him about the air situation being low. I told him how far back they were. I told him what we were thinking as far as drugs. And he was like, yeah, I'll ask around, but it sounds like a bad idea. And I was like, of course it's a bad idea, but can you just ask around? So I kind of left it at that, But as I said before, Rick and John, those 5 guys showed up, the additional divers, and then I guess I didn't initially think of this, but the UK divers did, and this was where it really kind of became serious and humbling, where we're like, hey, if we enact this plan and it goes south, I think we should bring in notes from the parents and let the kids write notes back to their parents, because that might be the last time that they ever get to speak with them. So that's what we did. We brought in a notepad, and the parents wrote notes to their children, and And then the kids got to write notes back, and it was actually pretty, the kids were, or the parents were a lot more, emotional about it, where the kids were just saying, I'm ready to get out of here, like a child's mind doesn't really understand the risks. And they were talking about wanting to eat food and just being out again, like a kid would. But it was a pretty neat thing that they did that I thought was good for the parents. So, we talk about all this technology in our modern day planning. This is literally the piece of 3x3 that we drew out, that we briefed the highest levels of leadership with. And as you can see, it depicts areas that are completely underwater, wading areas, and then floatable areas in the cave. It's tough to see at the bottom. There's like a scale that we have in meters, but where it says dry area, that's basically where we knew we had tanks, and we were going to do a tank swap for the child. And then where it says diveable, like on the lower left, where it says 350 M diving, that's all underwater. And so this really helped us, plan our logistical movements of, okay, if and when we have to do these tank swaps, how much air the kid's going to require, and how many extra tanks are the diver's going to require, and then like our emergency tanks in case everything goes south. This was like a real-time tracker of the divers and the kids. It was literally sticky notes on this thing, and this was up in our Joint Operations Center. And then you can see, we had the cave broken down into the 9 chambers. So as all this was happening, the Thais kept requesting a zero-risk option, zero-risk option. And I said, hey, that's not possible. Like, that doesn't exist. They're like, well, what if we leave him in there, for 4 or 5 months? And I said, well, 2 of them are already sounding like they have, kind of a lung infection, is from what I'm hearing. And it's going to require over 1,800 meals, and that was just feeding the kids 1 meal a day. When we brought in those 100, we had said, hey, only feed them 1 meal a day, and then come to find out they were feeding them 2 meals a day. And there was 5 Navy SEALs Thai Navy SEALs that had swam back in there. But unfortunately, they didn't tell us that they were doing that. So when they went in there to basically go back and stay with the kids, they were kind of stuck. They in cave diving, you have a rule of thirds, right? So you use a third of your air to go in, a third of your air to come out, and a third for contingencies, but you don't ever, that's like the golden rule. And these poor guys, not being cave divers, went in and then basically didn't have enough air to get out, So the 4 that were in there with a Thai doctor were basically stranded until additional air would have been brought in, and they were also, living with them, so they were having to eat some of those meals too. So even though I thought we had additional time, at the after action, I found out that all the food was pretty much gone too, but the last day of the rescue. And as you guys probably saw in the news, it was a sad day. As those air readings were coming out, they were still wanting to do a zero risk option, so they were basically told to try to run an oxygen tube all the way back, to 2.4 kilometers with a phone line, and they were going to leave the kids in there till the water drained out, which, oh, by the way, Vern texted me a picture in March of this year, and the water still hadn't receded from the T-junction in March, which was even more, solidifying of the point of that we had to dive them out. But this gentleman here, Saman, was trying to forward stage tanks and bring in air. I later found out that he had been retired and he hadn't dove in over 8 years. So again, having the right people for the job and sticking to those responsibilities was huge. But this really kind of changed the environment at the cave, because now that there was a death and everybody was kind of really staring at this problem as we were trying to bring the kids out, it almost reinforced our efforts, and then we really doubled down and said, okay, from now on, things have to be this way. We have to be, communicating with each other. You guys can't be doing stuff behind our backs, because that night when they were trying to pitch that plan to us, we were strongly against it, and almost to the point where, and I guess I didn't understand that they were being told they had to, but we all left the site early. All the other international teams left early, and that was the night that we found out he passed away. So the very next day, it was a kind of a sobering moment at the cave site, but it doubled our efforts that we were going to be successful. So as I talked about earlier, a lot of times in the news, people were showing pictures of two divers, one in front, one behind. That wasn't the case. It was too small. The way that the kids were actually, or that we figured out at the pool, the easiest way to do it was just do one diver, and he would basically hold the child like that, and that allowed, one, he couldn't see, but it allowed him to maneuver the child, and then two, what they told me was, as they were going through these real difficult parts, they didn't know if the kid was alive or breathing. But if they had him like that, they could feel the bubbles come off of his full face mask, and they knew that he was still breathing. So in a zero visibility environment, that was one way the only really way they knew that the kid was still breathing. Again, to just double down on our efforts, we dressed them up exactly how we would. We got child wetsuits, buoyancy compensators for them, played around with the weights and to make them streamlined, practiced putting their hands or their feet in front, behind, the easiest way. And then the most important thing was the full face masks and ensuring that we were jostling them around and bumping them like they would off the walls and that they wouldn't leak. And those masks, were a lifesaver and were one of the key pieces of equipment that made this mission successful. You guys can see here, one of the divers going through the steps of practicing, which way he wanted to swim and what would work best. Okay, so up to this point, everybody still wanted a zero risk option, right? We didn't have approval to execute this.